This is the Writers Are People Too podcast, where I can't get writers to just shut up. Tonight we have with us Francis Carmody. So your book, The Well-Dressed Neanderthal, I
Right.
actually love the Amazon blurb. And I'm going to go ahead and read a part of it now, the end part
Okay.
here. It goes, the Well-Dressed Neanderthal is a cosmic retelling of the Cain and Abel story, blending Genesis, Norse mythology, quantum mechanics, a kidnapped ex-naval aviator, a pitcher with a 94-mile-an-hour fastball, country music, a slacker chick, a mischievous Yorkshire Terrier, and a complex stew spiced with forbidden attraction between a troubled FBI agent and a beautiful, blue-eyed blonde with an earth-shattering secret. And that is a tongue twister. I'm so glad I got through the whole thing.
It is, yeah.
Um,
It's a long sentence. You got to
yeah.
take a big breath before you start to
And
read.
and that was only part of the entire blurb.
Mhm.
There's just so much to unpack here, and I love this.
Yeah.
But you started off by mentioning this Cain and Abel story, like a
Right.
retelling. So how does that tie into your story here?
Okay. Well, the backstory is, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but it doesn't really hurt much. Uh, the story is that the Neanderthals were the dominant species on Earth, and we modern humans came from a different planet altogether. And we killed off the Neanderthals. So we killed our brothers, the Neanderthals. So we are Cain, is what it amounts to.
Got it. I love that. And you've mentioned Norse mythology. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Hmm.
And so the Jotun, you've mentioned that in Norse mythology, but what's your experience with Norse mythology, whether it be reading it or studying it, or you saw a movie, and why'd you choose to include some of this in your book?
Well, I wanted to have that certain element in there, and I've read a lot of different mythologies. I'm no expert on it by any stretch of the imagination, but I did do quite a bit of research on Norse mythology, which I thought would be a better fit. And one of the reasons for that is because I wanted the um, the aliens to have, and these aliens are us, but I want them to have a certain, the more recent ones to have a certain unique look, which is more Nordic in appearance. And there's two factions in here. First of all, of course, you've got us, the regular guys, and we a long time ago forgot our history, and humans being humans, we were advanced civilization that came here. We killed off the Neanderthals, but then we devolved as humans tend to do in a lot of different wars and such. And where the mythology comes in is that mythology was passed down. It wasn't mythology at the time. It was actual tales of all the high tech equipment we had and things of that nature. And as it came down through the years, it came down as magical, as myths and legends and powers that were beyond what humans could do. So um, the way it fits in then is that a lot of the terms in there, for example, the bad guy in this is Thrym, and Thrym is he's the leader in northern mythology. He's the leader of what is sort of mistakenly called the giants. And I say giant in this book from time to time. I try to drop a bunch of little hints along the way that people will pick up on later. But Thrym was the leader of the Jotuns, which are the giants, and that's the bad element, and they're missing something. And I really don't want to give this part away, but they're missing something that the rest of us have, and there's a particular reason for that, and it's explained to some extent. Because actually, what's happened is the newly arrived people are not arriving in spaceships. We use technology to pass information, and I cheat a little bit here. I try to really stick to pretty sound science, but I use a little bit of latitude with entanglement. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but quantum entanglement. What the idea is that when you have two subatomic particles that are entangled, then they can be then if you and let's just use spin as an example. if you have one that spins to the right, the other one will also follow, regardless of the distance between them. So this sort of gets around the light speed problem. And of course, science fiction writers get around it a lot of ways with warp speed and with wormholes and things of that nature. And everybody's taken just a little bit of license in order to cover these great distances. And a physicist would argue with my explanation of entanglement. And it's not something that somebody's got to. They don't have to be a physicist or understand quantum mechanics or anything else to understand, since nobody does understand quantum mechanics actually, to understand that there's a sort of a brief explanation in there in a bar scene of all places, and that kind of explains it. So what's happening is that there's advanced technologies that people can kind of relate to. If you think about MRIs, you think about 3D printing, for example, and what happens is that your information is being passed on that can replicate people on this end. But when these replications started taking place, somebody got the bright idea. They said, well, why replicate once? Let's just do several times. The only problem is that the copies, if you will, they were lacking something, and those are the bad guys. Those are the guys who are led by Thrym. And what Thrym wants to do is he wants to get this artifact, and it's sort of a race by the good aliens. And I'll use the term aliens, but so by the good aliens with Thrym to get this artifact that is discovered actually in the first chapter.
Mm-hmm. I love all of that. I'm a super fan of the trope of finding old technology that's more advanced than we have now.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned a few times things that I've heard in popular culture, such as the aliens lacking something. I can kind of guess what that is, but I won't ruin it I won't spoil it in case I'm right. And this warp speed technology versus creating with quantum entanglement. Like, I've heard all those things, and I love all those.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to say about perhaps history not being what we've taught in this world? Are you kind of hinting at that, or is this just fantasy that you've pulled out of your imagination?
Oh, it's pure fantasy. I mean, I don't believe this. You could call it an alternate history. I like a lot of these alternate history books and that sort of thing too. But this is alternate on a wide scale. And I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of explanations in there about why we haven't found other artifacts and things of that nature. And just to give you an idea, that a lot of the aliens, both the good guys and the bad guys, the more newly arrived ones and such, they're archaeologists, and there are just a lot of these Nordic-looking people who are showing up in archaeology. Well, what happens is whenever somebody finds something that's out of place, who gets involved in it? The archaeologists get involved in it, so they're able to cover a lot of this stuff up. And that's there's some explanations in there about why a lot of these different alien ships, for example, have not been discovered, and that's one of the reasons why. And it also go into where as far as evolution is concerned, why we know what Lucy was, and then of course the Neanderthals developed out of that, but that was the end of their line. And then we came along, but we came from a different planet altogether.
Hmm. So in the blurb, you've mentioned that Ian is an alcoholic with problems of his own.
Right.
This sounds to me like the makings of a hard-boiled detective novel. And I
Yep.
can tell even in your blurb, you have sarcasm. It seems like it's rough around the edges, humor mixed in with this science fiction and esoteric knowledge. So tell me about your decisions to kind of mingle these genres.
Well, I think I wanted to have a flawed hero, and Ian is flawed in many ways, and the problems that he has, stem from his time in Iraq. that led to his alcoholism. And I think having a hero with a certain flaw is appealing, particularly nowadays for a lot of different reasons. It makes him much more human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you don't have to give any spoilers about this, but usually if your characters have a flaw, they have some sort of redemption arc. So what kind of redemption is he aiming towards?
There is a redemption, and the redemption involves um, the little girl named Raja that he meets in Iraq, and he he befriends her. She's a little 7-year-old girl. He befriends her. It's just it's the type of thing where you've got these soldiers out there going through Iraq, and the kids are begging for candy and what have you, and he befriends her. Well, but then later he does something, and not it's not on purpose, or where she gets caught in a crossfire that's caused by him, and so that leads ultimately to his alcoholism. But the redemption comes in that Raja, which by the way in Arabic means hopeful. And I put a glossary in the back of the book, because obviously a lot of people are not going to be that familiar with Norse mythology. They're not going to be familiar with some of the army terminology that I put in there. And there's not a lot of war or army or anything else. There's just a few scenes that are cut in from time to time, and they're somewhat out of sequence. But I still felt like people shouldn't have to sit at Google while they're reading the book to figure out what some of these things is. So I put that
Yeah.
I put some information in there, and I even recommend at the front of the book that if people aren't familiar with Norse mythology, if they're not familiar with some military terms, if they're and some other things that they could look in the glossary. Raja, I think, is the only Arabic word I use. It's a name, but it also means hope. So what happens is this gets tied in, to his redemption, and there's an angel involved in it, but the angel, and I don't want to give too much away here either. There's an explanation of what angels are. At the beginning of each chapter, I have quotes, and I have quotes from all all different genres, and everything from the Quran to the Bible to to Mark Twain, and a lot of different places. So, because I got like 40 some odd chapters, and I've always put a quote at the beginning of it. But there's an explanation in there about what angels are, and his redemption involves that.
Awesome. You want to read an excerpt from your novel?
Sure. Yep, I'll do that. Let me see. I was trying to think. Okay, what some of my favorite chapters, unfortunately, the ones that have too many spoilers in them.
Give away a little too much.
Yeah, and what I try to do is I'll try to I try to drop a lot of little hints all through the book, and I think that when somebody, for example, if someone finishes at the end of my book, and I've got I think a pretty good surprise at the end of it, but I wouldn't want someone to say, "I never saw that coming." I would want them to say, "I should have seen that coming." And there's a big difference, and because any author can take something out of the blue and sort of throw it in there, like it's this big surprise, and that's kind of cheating in my mind, because you got to leave hints along the way, so that when somebody finally does see it, they say, "Oh, I should have seen that," and that would be meaningful. Okay, but this is what I call it. First sight is chapter 3, and what's happened at this point is the artifact has been discovered at the archaeology site, and what the artifact is, by the way, it's a high-tech instrument on the wrist of a Neanderthal who was murdered about 30,000 years ago, and it somewhat resembles a watch. It's not a watch, but it somewhat resembles a watch. and it's all the way around his wrist, so it's not something that was dropped at the site or something of that nature. And then in the second chapter, it's called The Cold Men, and in that we're introduced to an elderly lady. She's 92, and she's black. She was kidnapped when she was a child by what she called the cold men, because one thing that the aliens like is they like cold. They don't like it hot like it is in Texas. And so Ian and his friend and partner now go to visit what they call their auntie, because they've known her for a long time, and she tells Ian that they're back because she saw a couple of people who had a couple of men who had in 1936 had taken her, and of course they still look young, and there's a reason for that too, and there's an explanation for it. But then she recognized them right away. These are the same two men that abducted her when she was 7 back in 1936. Okay, so that's already happened. Now, in this chapter called First Sight rather, chapter 3, all that's occurred, and now in this chapter, what happens is, and I try to do this sometimes too, is this is where Ian first sees Judith, and Judith is the team lead for the good guys, the good aliens who are there to stop Thrym from getting to the artifact first. And what I do is I try to show the same scene from two different perspectives, happening at the same time. So this is Ian's part of it. So here's Ian. Ian comes in. He sees her. And first sight, of course, this is not only his first time seeing her, but it's also his first sight of an alien, if you will. And then the second half of it is the same scene, but from her perspective. But I'll just read his part because it's let's see, his goes for about 3 pages, so that shouldn't
Perfect.
take too long. Okay, so it starts out first sight, and I have a quote at the beginning. It says, "And yonder sits a maiden, the fairest of the fair, with gold in her garment glittering, as she touches her golden hair." And that's Heinrich Heine. Okay, so it's I say, Ian steps out of a bright morning sun into the subdued lighting of a dark wood-paneled black walnut restaurant. He wore dark blue gabardine pants, a white button-down shirt, a red and blue striped tie, and highly shined brown Oxford shoes. And despite the heat, he wore his suit to hide the Sig Sauer P238 he carried at his hip. He took in the surroundings, second nature to him now. The crowd of 20 or so diners was perhaps a bit sparser than normal, since COVID had made caution the new normal. Conversations were mostly subdued, except for the 4 rather loud middle-aged soccer moms in tennis outfits seated in one of several booths running the length of the building from front to back. Their untanned skin suggested they either played before the sun could find them or didn't play long when it did. 2 cops sat leaning over coffee at the horseshoe-shaped bar dominating the room. One apparently spent a good bit of time at the gym. The other apparently spent a good bit of time at Dunkin' Donuts. The lawmen were casually solving the world's most serious problems with Noah, the hip man-bun bartender who had majored in sociology at the University of Houston and had been trying for the past 6 years to pay down the Sisyphean debt he'd incurred earning that worthless degree. I hope nobody has a sociology degree out there. It's not really. I mean, any degree is fine, but this works in this.
Hey, I got an English major, which is pretty much worthless, but here I am,
Yeah,
interviewing authors.
Yeah. Perhaps somewhere along the way up that hill, someone should have warned him that tribal tattoo that the tribal tattoo decorating his neck would increase the slope of that interminable task. The only other customer Ian couldn't help but notice at the bar was a huge, remarkably obese giant in a white Astros jersey and a Sol baseball cap sporting the Napa Auto Parts logo. His round head sat directly on an equally round body like a snowman without a neck. Ian settled in at a table by the front window overlooking the covered patio, where a few folks ate, undeterred by the warmth still clinging to the morning's wet air. He was 2 sips into his first cup of coffee when he observed his sister's blue Toyota Camry pull into the lot and negotiate a parking spot. Kathy Coxswain was of average height, thin, and wore her long, light brown hair in a ponytail when she dressed in scrubs, as she did today. She had been married to Jedediah Coxswain. He's a professor that is first introduced in chapter 1. She had been married to Jedediah Coxswain for 11 years, and even though he'd been in the Navy when they had married, she had never grown used to his being gone for months at a time. The COVID virus had precluded her visiting him in Germany during the dig, so at this point she was beyond excited he'd be returning from Germany in just a couple of days. Ian raised his hand to get his sister's attention. "Hey, Kathy, inside or out?" "This is good." She placed her cell and keys on the table and took a seat across from Ian. "You placed the order yet?" Ian nodded. "Yeah, about 5 minutes ago." "You look tired, Ian. Are you getting enough sleep?" "I had a late night, but I'll be fine. So anyway, how are my nieces?" She touched his hand, ignoring the question. "Raja again?" "Don't worry about it. I'm fine." "So how are my nieces?" His sister didn't press the issue, knowing better. "Driving me nuts. I can't wait until Jed gets home, even if it will be only for a few days," she said, emphasizing the second half of that sentence. Ian pretended to miss her meaning. "So how did the kids handle virtual training?" "It was fine for a while, but it really wasn't all that challenging. I'm a little concerned they'll be a bit behind." And as Kathy continued her lament, the extremely tall, morbidly obese man rose from his seat at the bar, exposing a tall, pale woman with long blonde hair. She wore jeans adorned with a gold skinny belt and a white sleeveless shirt, revealing a vine tattoo climbing gently from one wrist to her shoulder, twisting around a toned, well-defined bicep. Tiny blue and yellow flowers sprouted from the light green leaves, a delicate, lacy, enticing celebration of her femininity, strength wrapped in lace. Ian was transfixed and only vaguely aware his sister had asked him a question. "Have you been to a meeting lately, Ian?" "Ian?" Ian looked at his sister. "Sorry, what was that?" It was her turn to smile knowingly. "A bit distracted, I see." "Okay, I'll wait until you're finished gawking." "I wasn't gawking, I was stealing glances. There's a difference." "That depends on your perspective, I suppose." "I'm simply driven by a biological imperative. It's nature. It's lust." "What's the difference?" She smiled again, shaking her head, and then grew serious. "Anyway, Ian, have you been to any meetings lately?" Ian shook his head, wanting to change the subject. "No, but I've talked to my sponsor once or twice." Kathy frowned. "Likely a lot more than once or twice. How does it make sense to have the owner of the biggest bar in the Woodlands as a sponsor?" "It works just fine. Leave it alone. You wade into temptation every time you cross the threshold of that place. You want me to close my eyes whenever I pass a bar or a liquor store or a wine aisle at Kroger's? Should I avert my eyes from the bar at the center of this room and tell myself it doesn't exist?" Kathy had heard it all before, too, and she knew to stay clear of the little girl's death, lying beneath Ian's graduation from heavy social drinker to full-on drunk. So she surrendered for the day. "Okay, Ian, but you should attend meetings, too." "Yeah, I know," Ian conceded, still distracted and wanting to move on. "But hold that thought a minute. I've got to go powder my nose before breakfast is served." He stood to leave, then turned, tilting his head toward the bar. "Don't let that blonde biological imperative get away." So,
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I
mhm.
love how it was very funny. I love the humor that you put in there next to the very tense theme of alcoholism. I think it's It's a good juxtaposition. You got to have strong themes and then also a little bit of lightheartedness to balance things out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you mentioned COVID a few times. Was this a COVID project?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a COVID project because when did I start this thing? I'd have to think. What is to? You know what? I guess it was about then. Yeah, it was about then. Because most of this takes place. The Iraqi scenes, take place 13 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
or 13 years prior to 2020. The most of these take place in 2020, so it may have been a COVID thing. It's hard for me to remember exactly because it took me about a year all told to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I
How
started.
many words is it?
How many words?
Yeah.
It was. I'll tell you what. It was originally 60,000 words, and I had agents tell me that wasn't enough. So I went back in and I thought, and this was before I even had decided to have Ian have that flaw, have that alcoholism that he had to deal with, and that's where I put that whole thing in there, including the whole element of Raja, and I added about another 20,000 words, and then I cut it back by cut it down to about 72,000 words by getting rid of a lot of sort of I call them fillers, just things that sort of slowed the book down a bit. So it's
Mm-hmm.
about 72,000 now.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you chatting with me and reading that excerpt. You got any final comments before I let you go?
No, I appreciate it though. It's an enjoyable experience. It's my first interview on this.
Well, I'm sure there'll be many more. And everybody, we had Francis Carmody.
All right, thanks.